Well, welcome back, folks. Today's going to be part 2 of this 2004 YZ250F refurbishation. Is that even a word? Anyway, we got a lot of work to do on this thing. Hopefully you saw last week's episode, and if you did, you know sort of what's going on with this bike. If not, we got a quick recap. We pulled the engine, had a bad transmission, so we put a used transmission in it, put it back together, and then it wouldn't start. Although it was running before we took it apart. Turns out, for whatever reason, one of the stator coils is open, no longer getting spark. So I have a new stator for the bike. We're going to put that together and get this thing running. So this video is also going to include getting this rear wheel situated. It's got a lot of loose spokes, so we need to adjust that. We're going to replace the rear tire. It needs front wheel bearings desperately. May even need rear wheel bearings, but I can't tell as of right now. And we're going to rebuild these front forks. I also have a new chain and sprockets to put on this thing to make it just so nice. First things first, we're going to get going on this rear wheel. I want to pull this rear wheel off and get the tire off, and then we're going to chuck this wheel up and get these spokes adjusted up. Those spokes are loose as a goose. Well, this was a little bit of a pain. I probably should have just snipped them and replaced them. I didn't realize they were going to be so rusty and stuck from the beginning. Put a little time into it, got them all freed up, and that'll save some money for something else on this bike. All this stuff is cooled down now, so all I need to do is basically true this wheel, which means take the run out, which means take the wobble out. Now all the spokes are snug. They have no play in them. And at this point now, I just want to try to true this wheel by tightening and loosening on each side until the wheel is spinning freely. I'm going to do a rough adjustment now, but don't do any final adjustments on your chain slack until the bike is on the ground, because the suspension may tighten up the chain a little. Well, I got the back end sorted out. Now it's time to get this front end apart, get these front wheel bearings replaced, get these forks out, and get them resealed and refilled properly. These fork seals don't look too terribly bad. I've certainly seen worse. Well, you might be asking why I pulled the bars off just to do the forks. Well, reason being is I want to check these bearings in this neck. These are very common to be bad on these Yamahas, and to be honest with you, it's extremely tight. Although I don't feel any binding, it's just tight. It may be over tightened. We could probably lubricate and put them back together, but I got to get it apart and see if the bearings are still viable candidates for use. Honestly, I can see why it's binding up. The bearings are not in bad shape. They just really need to be cleaned and re-greased properly. Once you get your fork apart, you want to inspect these guides here. If they're severely worn through, you want to get a kit to replace those as well. Now we're going to take this and our outer tube over to the parts washer and get these cleaned up. So this is as far as I'm going to disassemble this fork for doing these fork seals. If the fluid in here was just absolutely nasty, I would definitely recommend removing the whole inner structure and cleaning this thing. So our next step is getting our seals put back together. This tool right here is a little plastic tool for helping the seals slide over these lips. You will absolutely destroy the seals because these edges are so sharp, they'll just tear the seal up. Another option is a very, very thin plastic bag over the end to help slide the seals, but this $5 tool makes it so much easier. Now to get the proper measurement of fluid in these Yamaha forks, and I'm using 5-weight oil, we're going to fill this tube right to the very top. Now with the fork completely compressed and the fluid filled just about to the top, we're going to pump our dampening rod about 10 times, slowly up and down to get the fluid in there. You should feel a lot of tension on it as you're pulling it up. Once you've done that and you don't hear any more air rushing, and of course if you need to add a little bit more as you go, it's not a problem, just to make sure that this thing isn't sucking any air in. We're going to refill it back to the top again. Now finally what we want to do is pump our outer fork tube up and down once or twice, not exceeding 8 inches or about 200 millimeters. So after letting the fork sit for about 10 minutes, let all the air bubbles come out, we want to get our fork level to the proper level. In the US, that is 140 millimeters or about 5.5 inches. So this fancy little graduated tool here will show you in millimeters a depth. And what we're doing is measuring from the top of the fork tube down. So if I get my glasses on, and I can read these little tiny marks, we're going to set that at 140 millimeters. What we'll do is drop this down. This sits on top of the fork, and we'll use a syringe like this to pull the fluid out until it's at the proper level. Now if you don't have one of these tools, which you probably don't, obviously you can pour out a little bit of fluid and just take a measurement with a small tape measure to about 5.5 inches. Now we know our fluid is at the right height. Don't forget the center dampening rod. Remember to reset your clickers to where they were. This fork feels and looks fantastic, and it's basically going to be the exact same thing on your second fork. One thing to keep in mind is when you put your forks back in, this bleeder screw, sometimes it has a push button if somebody got fancy with it. This wants to go towards the front of the bike. That's the highest point of the fork, and this is to bleed any air off. Now since I had my top clamp off and I don't have this tight yet, I just want to tighten my bottom clamp up, because now that the forks are all in alignment, when I tighten this up, if these are tight on the fork, it's going to bind. And before you tighten your top clamp up, go ahead and snug these top caps up. And there you have it. These forks are very, very easy to do on these things. Again, I'd recommend getting the right tool for sliding the fork seals over the tubes, because definitely you'll damage them and you'll be right back to square one again. Alright, so we got ourselves a brand spanking new used Stator. Let's open it up, do the testing thing, and see if we're back to square one. Alright, let's check the pickup coil. Red to white. 248 to 372 ohms. .287 falls within that spec. Charging coil 1, green and brown. 720 to 1080. We got 858. That's perfect. And finally, charging coil number 2, pink to black. And we're going to be looking at 44 to 66 ohms. And that falls within spec. We got ourselves a good Stator. Alright, much higher hopes of it starting now. Well, I guess we're ready to give this another shot. I'm not looking forward to it. Well, she's there. It's just going to need some carb tweaking. I'm sure if they had the idle cranked all the way down since it was idling so high. Let me go ahead and recheck the oil and get some coolant in this thing before we run it too much longer. Well, I know you can see it looks a little bit different. I foolishly assumed that I had a rear fender from a 2012 YZ250F. It was a little scratched up, but the rest of the body was scratched up, and I figured it would just fit, but it didn't. And I couldn't just replace a rear fender, so I had to get a body kit for it. Anyway, this radiator that we bent back into shape, that was also leaking, so I had to get a set of aftermarket radiators that actually fit pretty well. The kit did not come with a front number plate, so I just threw a scratched up one on there for now. I'll probably end up ordering one, but I think the bike came out really nice and it looks really nice. I'm yet to take it out on the street. It was a little drizzly and rainy here today, but I'm probably going to brave it. I want to make sure this transmission shifts the way it should. Woo, is it cold out here? Fifth gear and she pulls nice. No slipping. As always, I want to thank you all for all your support, all your positive feedback, all your comments. If you like this content, give me a thumbs up. Appreciate all of you tuning in, and we'll see you on the next one. And I think we're going to get away from the YZs for a couple builds anyway.